Our kids were.
Okay, we are on.
All right, I'd like to call to order the December 3rd, 2025 board meeting of the South Burlington School Board. The first item on the agenda is an executive session. The executive session is going to cover employment of a public officer, receiving legal counsel for the purpose of providing legal services to the board, and I would entertain a motion to find that premature disclosure of the contents that we're going to talk about in the executive session would put the district at a disadvantage.
I move. I'll move.
Laura moved.
And
Sam seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session. Michelle moved. Laura seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. So we're now in executive session and we will return at about 6:30 p.m. where board members will go back and forth and discuss things with the public. There are 3 topics on the discussion on the community forum: the budget, the superintendent search, and also talking about the NASDAQ New England School Development Council best use study proposal. Before we talk about that, the superintendent Joe requested that we talk about the best use study proposal, and so there's a question about whether we should put that in a superintendent report, but we figured that since we're having a community forum, we might as well allow the public to comment about whatever there was to say about that. So that's the rest of the agenda. Is there any about the agenda itself? All right, so I guess we'll accept the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is comments from the public. So at the South Burlington School Board, there are 3 opportunities in general for the public to comment during this section about any topic, even if it is not warned on the agenda. Also, before the board takes action on any action item, but only on that topic. Finally, during a community forum and only on warrant topics, of which today we have 3. So this meeting is a community forum, so you will be able to discuss warrant topics with the board and the board may respond. You'll be given approximately 3 minutes to comment. Please do not violate anyone's privacy, and an official complaint or grievance will not be filed during public comment. So this section again is of any topic. So if anybody wants to talk about anything, they're now welcome to do so. Anybody? Yep, we have somebody.
Hi, my name is Brian Companion, and my comment this evening would fall into the topic of public relations, treatment of the public, use of school facilities. And I don't believe it's any of your making because the decision that I'm going to talk about was done last year. But last year there was a decision made that groups like Girl Scouts, Mini Metro Basketball, and other groups that service South Burlington children had to begin paying for meeting space. And first time it's ever happened. I mean, people like Rick Marcotte and Fred Tuttle would stay and let people into the building and stay with them. So I thought that's kind of sad because when I coached 30 years ago, we just contacted the principal and we were welcome in the building. But maybe those are the times. I went to a lot of games and I asked people last year, are you paying for gym time? No, we're not. I asked some administrators I know, are you charging for gym time? No. And basically their consensus comments, I'll just give them to you. No, those are the folks that approve our budgets. They've already paid for the schools. It doesn't feel good. Sensitive. One athletic director who's been around for like 30 years, I asked him, his comment was, I wouldn't do that. He said, when we're fundraising, those are the folks that support and supplement our programs, and not just athletics, but everything we do. And you kind of a shrewd guy, I don't wanna be competing with them for the fundraising now. But this has driven up the cost of this program, just so you know, the league that our kids play in, I think we have 18. Has 140 teams in it. They play all over, the state. From Barry to St. Jay, over to St. Albans, down to Middlebury and in between. We won't provide a gym in South Burlington, so two things happen, our teams play away games all the time, and they pay a higher registration fee. So the cost of the program has been driven up, which we all know there's affordability issues for some families. That all said, can we fix this? Can we get back to the norm, what seems to be in Vermont, that youth programs are welcomed in schools if they're available and at no charge? Thank you.
Any other public comment in the room? Anybody online? All right, then we'll move on to our community forum. And for anybody just joining us, the purpose of a community forum is to set up an environment where the board can in the forum talk about issues and respond back and forth to any of the public's comments or questions. And so the three warrant topics that we have tonight, budget, superintendent search, and best use study proposal. We'll start with the budget. Maybe I'll start the bidding by saying that at an earlier meeting in November, the school board asked the superintendent to create a budget at the Northeast consumer price index inflation number of 3.4%. And that has now been on the superintendent's desk for a while. And so what we have on the agenda here is come discuss your priorities and how this money is spent. Now those priorities, if you raise them tonight, that's more for the superintendent to hear and the principals who are here to hear, because they have control over how the money is actually spent. But really anything having to do with the budget is open and fair game. So do you want to say anything?
I have
Joe?
I have a short presentation if you'd like me to give that
That'd be
before
great.
the floor is open. I don't know if we have a projector or not, but I can share it. I'm sharing it on,
All right, so if you have you're logged into the Zoom, you'll be able to see the presentation. But maybe you can just give us the high level notes.
what am I sharing here? The screen or the workbook? I believe you should.
So show everything.
There it is. I got it. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for giving me the time to talk about this here at the board open forum, December 3rd. Much of this is the same presentation that I gave to the community at the community open forum, but it's been adjusted just a little bit because some decisions have been made since then. So this is rudimentary. Everybody knows that every fall, every school district in Ohio, we don't have to do this in Ohio. In Vermont must create its budget for the next school year. And so this school year, we are developing our budget for next school year, which is 26-27. I know the district before my time here did a survey of South Burlington stakeholders, and nearly 275 people responded. And what they overwhelmingly said is they want to increase engagement, they want transparency in the process, they want us to rebuild some trust, and they really focused on greater principal ownership. They wanted principals to have the ability to make decisions at their building level. So this is the timeline of where we are in this process. Now, the school board already has come up with that amount, like you said, Chairman Abshir, it is the $74 million. We are now at the point where we have made allocations to the principals, and they are now at the point where they'll be able to start deciding how they're going to spend that money in their buildings. And then in January, we'll come to you with the final budget for you to approve, and then election day in March. Here's again the timeline.
Can you go through the timeline?
Oh, yes, I can. So we had the special meeting on November tenth. That's where you set the agenda, the $74 million number, which is 3.4% increase, right? We had a virtual town hall on November 18th. Tonight, December 3rd, you're hosting the in-person community forum. Our principals over the next couple of weeks will be hosting school level engagement. January 14th is the board meeting to approve the budget, and then town meeting day on March 3rd. And we do recognize, by the way, this is, we are a little behind in the process simply because of the mass turnover within the leadership team. So it will not be like this every year. We'll be a little bit further ahead than where we are. So on November 10th, the board approved a 3.4% increase for our budget going in the next school year. That equates to a $74 million budget based on the CPI in the Northeast region. Now, we do absolutely appreciate the investment. However, we did note that if we were not to make any changes at all, if we wanted to keep everything current, we would have needed a 6% increase. And that 6% would have equated to $76 million budget. And that's due to inflation, healthcare increases at about 7.5%, and wage increases at about 5.5%. So what that means is that there was really a $2 million gap between what the board approved and what would be not making any changes. And I do have some good news to report, in my opinion, and that is that we have protected the school buildings budgets. We at the central office have identified enough savings to allow us to protect the schools from any reductions. In other words, we're able to give each school that 6% increase to stay status quo. Central office, we're making the bulk of the reductions by operating more efficiently, and it will also include a reduction of some central office positions. I'm really not at liberty to tell you what those positions are now because there's a communications framework we need to follow, because people shouldn't hear about reductions at a board meeting. They should hear it from the superintendent himself. But suffice to say, we found 2 million and maybe more in savings at the central office or district-wide level, so it will not impact classrooms. This is what the budget model looks like. Now that we had a long discussion this morning with the principals about the required funded by law positions. These are positions that it's the bare minimum. This is what is the state declares is the bare minimum to run a school. These are the number of teachers you need for the large class sizes. This is the number of counselors and librarians, et cetera, for your student count. Again, we want to make everybody clear that that's the bare minimum, and schools just do not operate on the bare minimum. So that's where the next box comes in, the green box, which is the CARE, the critical resources for education. So when we talk about these CARE critical resources for education, that's all the stuff that makes us not just compliant, but actually effective, right? That is what brings our class sizes down. That's what provides extra social emotional support for our students. Those are all those kinds of things. So we don't want people to think that we're throwing 6% more at each building. That is absolutely not what we're doing. We are increasing their budgets to coincide with the increased prices, but we are not at a point where we are going to go to the bare minimum, and hope that we never have to get to a point where we're at the absolute bare minimum. Our students deserve more. So the final budget then will be when the principals have what they are required by law to have, and then they have their CARE money that they can determine how they're going to spend that money. Are we going to add an extra teacher at this grade? Are we going to add a little more counseling at this grade? Whatever they decide they're going to do, That will then come into the budget that's brought to you in January for approval. So and I'm almost done, before we get to opening comments, I just want people to remember that we do have an ends policy, here, in South Burlington. The ends policy is, what do we expect our kids to know and be able to do when they graduate, from high school? And we ask our principals, of course, but we also ask the community to please consider the ends when you make suggestions or comments about what the budget should be, right? Because we don't want to handicap ourselves from being able to achieve these ends. So the first end that we have is, we want all of our students to have a disposition for lifelong learning. I won't read all the bullet points to you there, but we want to make sure that our programming prepares our students to realize that they will be learning for the rest of their life, that it's not just 12 years and out. We have an end of academic proficiency. We want all of our students to be able to achieve at a level that's going to allow them to find meaningful work and make meaningful contributions to society. We want all of our students to grow personally, personal development, so they are able to set goals for themselves. They're able to live responsibly. They're able to be confident and resilient and adapt to different pitfalls that go in their way, right? And the final thing that we want all of our students to have is citizenship. We want people, our students, to understand the impact of history and government and law and economy, all those kinds of things. Again, this makes them well-rounded, not just well-rounded students, well-rounded citizens. It helps them continue to move our community forward. So those are the things that we want to preserve. And we hope to do that by, again, providing the same percentage of resources to the buildings that we did this current year, next year, so they do not have to make any reductions to the services they're providing. But we as central office recognize that we can absolutely operate a little more leanly, and there are things that we can do better, and that's what we plan to do. So I would, as we go into the open forum, I would just ask people to consider, what our ends are as you come up and make your comments. And the questions I would ask them to think are, what ideas do you have for the principals to consider as they create their building budgets? And what ideas do you have for additional efficiencies central office should consider? Knowing that I can't give you any specifics now, and we've considered a lot, but I would love to hear any ideas that are out there for that. The last slide is just a reminder of the upcoming opportunities, which are principal posted events in their buildings, the January 14th meeting and town meeting day on March 3rd. And there's a QR code so people can go onto our website and read all the information and watch videos like this. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. So does any board member want to start with any comments or questions? Anybody from the public have anything to say about budgeting matters? Can I? Yeah, please.
Thank you. My name is Sriram Srinivasan. Thank you again for the opportunity to share some observations. I've shared a couple of detailed emails with the board. Then I've also sent a follow-up email to Dr. Clark. I appreciate that you are on the path of finding efficiency and hopefully settle on a budget that reflects the objective that the board set. Glad to hear that. But I just want to kind of address the mechanics of the budget based on the comments I made last time. So from what I understood, the teacher's contract is a 4.25% increase in salary for fiscal year 26, the current fiscal year, starting July. The support staff will have a 5.26% increase for the first year, full year. If you do the math for those two, the teacher salaries and the paraeducator salaries. The total salary increase will be roughly 1.2 million. Okay, do the math. If there is any other group of employees other than paraeducator salaries in the second contract, please let me know. I don't think the adjustment will be significant. So from what I understood from the last meeting, there was a $2 million reserve on a contingency in a miscellaneous item, the last year's budget, to account for these contract increases. So if the effective increase is only 1.2 million for the salary increases, let's just say that it's 1.2 million, maybe it needs to be adjusted. The rest of the residual money needs to come off of the baseline of fiscal year 26 budget. Everyone on that concept, agree with the concept? So I just want to make that point first. So I hope.
Sorry, just to say, I don't necessarily agree, but I think I understand.
If you leave it at 3.26% on top of that, that's not a good budgeting practice. You cannot take the money that you didn't spend and then apply the 3.26%. There's a term for that in the private sector. Okay, there's a term for that. I will not say it. So, I
think you should say it. I think
it's called sandbag. Okay, so I'm just pointing out, it's something that sticks out in the budgeting process of school districts. And it's a very simple adjustment, and I just want to bring it to life. Because if you go back in the history and you'll see that the contingency is not fully used. But contingency is contingency. Right, so I just want to make that point. So whatever the number is, total number of effective salary increase, whether it's 1.2 million, 1.3 million, 1.4 million, whatever it is, there is a residual amount in the contingency that needs to come off of the baseline. Okay, that should be as effective savings of the current baseline. Okay, that's number one. The second one I just want to focus on is the purchase professional and technical services. There was a 1.35 million increase. In the other purchase services, there was a 1.37 million increase. The detailed email I had sent, I was wondering whether some of this is a one-time cost. You know, there are things like other purchase services, student transportation purchase from other sources, roughly $325,000. It just stands out last year. I wonder whether it's a one-time spend. If it is a one-time spend, that needs to come off of the baseline. So I'm just pointing out a process issue here. So it's just not, I'm not sure. It's a good practice just to take the last year's number and apply a multiplier. So if you're looking for efficiency, apart from whatever operating efficiency you're looking for, I think the community needs to see the appropriate baseline adjustments. Okay, so that's the point I want to make. And if it is not clear, I'm not coming up with any new data. It's the same data that I shared with you. So if you don't agree with this, please respond to it. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
that's great. Any board members have any thoughts on? Good.
I mean, I'd be curious. I think those are excellent points that you raised. And I think my question would be to Joe and Jean Marie. You know, how are you accounting for those comments or for that type of situation where, you know, or is there any review to look at that? And, you know, as part of an audit process, I don't know that I'd call it exactly, maybe it needs to be like an audit for how specifically the budgets are being built. And to see if there's any like redundancies or things that are showing up and you're getting the snowballing effect where it
Yeah.
just continues to carry
I mean, the
over.
answer is yes, we do look at redundancies and some of that 2 million in savings that the central office is able to come to was through some redundancies.
Okay.
I would offer that there absolutely has to be some sort of contingency because we can't control how many students enroll with us. We can't control what kind of services that they need to be offered. So I think it would be impossible to develop a budget that will be spent to the penny. That's not responsible. So I think our budgets are a little more conservative. That there is some contingency built in for those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, and if I could just respond to what I understood of what you said. I think that it, as a board, like as an individual board member, I don't know the details of the operations, the expenses and all those things. And so I think our role as elected representatives of the taxpayer is to say, what is a fair burden to put on the taxpayer, and also what is a fair amount of monitoring and governance put on the district, right? And there's both things are important. And so when we say, what was the budget number on the ballot last year, and then we just add inflation to that, I think that we're assuming that there are going to be like an average number of contingencies, right? And so like the one-time costs that may have happened last year, there are going to be different one-time costs this year. And so we can't just cut them out and then, do the baseline. So that's from where I said.
Can I please respond to that?
Yeah. And also, if anybody, I think the rule is basically like, if anybody else wants to comment, they're allowed to comment. And everybody's allowed to comment. They move to the front of the line, if they haven't commented, yeah, and so, but.
So I appreciate Dr. Clark's comments about contingencies. Obviously, you're gonna have new contingencies going forward because you have new risks and new issues. All I'm saying, asking for is, whatever contingencies you had for last year on one-time expenses you had, to the extent that you did not spend that money, it's not going to record, please make an adjustment. I'm not asking you to do anything differently about your governance. It's just a good budget practice. That's all I'm saying.
Right, and what I'm suggesting is that's exactly what we're doing. We are finding places where money was budgeted that hasn't been used, and we can make that reduction without impacting students in the class.
So just to make my point more specific and relevant here. This cost center of 5519, student transportation purchased from other sources, you look back at history. The school district has not spent $325,000 in 1 year. That's a one-time expense. If that goes into the baseline and you're adding 3.5% on top of that, that's not a good budgeting process. Look, there's so much difficulty in managing expenses for the school district. All of us know that. I'm pointing out some low-hanging fruits. These are low-hanging fruits. I'm not even here to discuss other significant stuff, because those things take tremendous amount of energy. I'm just asking you to consider, do the due diligence on low-hanging fruits, please. Okay? Thank you. Something passing.
Yeah, we can look into it. I think Jean Marie has something to say too. I can just speak in broad terms. I would say this, if there is a other transportation costs that had never appeared before and appeared last year, that probably means that they were coded wrong earlier. Because every school district I've ever been a part of has private transportation, most often for students with disabilities, who we have to provide private transportation to. So if nothing existed prior to last year, I would say it was probably an accounting error. And we will have those costs moving forward. I can't tell you what those costs are because I haven't been here long enough to absorb that. Jean Marie.
I was gonna say, and it's exactly that, Joe, one of the benefits of there being a lot of new staff members at the central office is there's a whole new set of eyes looking at things, and we're doing business in a different way than we have done in past years. I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody that was in any of these positions before, but it's just a fresh set of eyes looking at things. So I think that is, you're gonna continue to see differences in budgets to come, if Joe and I and the rest of the team were able to stay with the school district. I would agree with your comment about private transportation, that doesn't surprise me at all. One of the things that happened in the spring of 24 was we changed our fiscal management software. And there were a lot of inaccuracies that were done prior to, so more, as we go along, our numbers will get more and more accurate. I would also say that, oh gosh, it just right out of my head. The other comment that you made.
No rush.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I did have another comment to tell you. Oh, that was that we did have, there was a past practice of if we budgeted you for, $25,000 of toilet paper last year, we're gonna give it to you again this year, but we're gonna add 3% for inflation, like that's how we did do our budgeting. One of the big differences that we've done this year that's helping us with our savings is if we always gave you a $25,000 toilet paper budget, but you only ever spent 15,000, but we kept giving you 25. In our new budget that we're proposing, we're only gonna give you 15. So that may feel like a cut to some of our budget managers, but it's much more accurate in our budget. So that's a pretty big change. The way that we created the budget this year, particularly around those non-personnel costs, was to look at our last completed and audited budget, of what we actually spent, roll it and add CPI to it, roll it again and add CPI again. So that hopefully is so much more accurate forecasting for some of those things that we can control. But there are things that we can't control that we do need to have contingencies for, like furnaces that bite the dust and equipment that needs to be replaced. So I don't need to take up more of your time, but I just wanted to have those comments. Thanks.
Yeah, I do now have a comment to that.
Oh, first, I really want to thank Srini or Sri.
Yes, Srini.
Srini, for your comments, and I quite agree. And the need to rethink this kind of standard government practice, not just increases blindly. But there's the underlying part of it too, and that's what my question is, which is that past practice has created probably some dependencies, right? And some expectations about the perception of the damage caused by the loss of the money. And so what I'm getting at is, what are you, and I guess you don't have to answer it now, but maybe just make sure that we're all thinking about this. What kinds of things can be put in place in terms of modern, how the board support you in this, how will you think about this? Gaming the system, right? So, well, use it or lose it. We have a military background. That was a very common thing to hear. And I would be extremely disappointed if that became common practice as a result of this more focused and precise budgeting aspect.
Yeah, I don't think that that's been a practice here. I do think that, I know that all of our budget managers, our building principals, as well as our, other area budget managers are incredibly mindful of their budgets. I've only been with the district for 18 months, but what I can tell you is that in that time, those budget managers have said to me many times, like really could use another half a person here, but like we're stringing it together and oh, this building wants more of this, but I didn't budget for that, so I'm gonna do the best that I can. Like, I really truly believe that they all have very good hearts and good intentions for the way that they're managing their budget. They don't foresee that anyone, is purposely misusing funds. I do think that there are some historical practices that Joe and I are trying to change. Things that he's shared with you guys offline that will be impactful and will be a little bit of change in the way that we do business. Yeah, I appreciate the support and I think that that's important. The other comment I was gonna make is that I do think at the end of the year, there may be times where budget managers look and say, oh, I do have $10,000 left in this budget and I really could use some new tables in the cafeteria, so I'm going to spend the money on that, right? So So it isn't, I mean, it is a little bit of the use it or lose it, but it's use it in a good way, not in the like, taking us all out to lunch because I got money left in the budget. Much as I care about taking me on a trip to Aruba, since you found some extra money in your budget, that isn't what happens. There is the like, well, we really could use like new desks in this classroom or, you know, I joke about like.
I wasn't really thinking of malicious intent, more
Yes,
that,
right.
well, if I don't have the same amount. If I know that it's not gonna be an incremental increase to what I have in my budget right now. That does mean I'm going to lose money, I'm going to lose money if I'm managing that budget, right? And it just like it, I'm worried about culture shift.
Yeah.
That does look for tables, well, oh, the kids could use some new.
Yeah. But, and then the flip side of that too is that we have to be mindful, like the IT team that reports to me is there are things that they think that we need from a security standpoint in a way that we do business now that is different than the way that our previous IT team operated. And I keep saying to them, yes, but remember, we're not buying chalkboards and chalking. Like we're buying laptops or we're buying smartboards. Like it is a different way that we're doing business. And so those expenses look different and feel different in the classrooms and in the buildings. But so we have to be mindful of those things like, oh man, like next year, we do need to buy, you know, this fancy IT thing that needs to be updated because it's at the end of its life, like.
So that's it.
Yeah, so that would, you know, mean that maybe that non-personnel budget's gonna tick up that year for those items and tick back down the next year, so.
So, I mean, might not know, so with the example that you recently gave where. It was, say, 10,000 left over
Yeah.
from one line item and.
Yeah.
Purchase something else that is probably needed for the schools.
Yeah.
Where's the oversight and how, who makes that? Approve it?
Yeah, so that all goes through the budget managers and the business office and then up to the superintendent, so, and it could be. I mean, like, toilet paper is not a great example, but, there could be things in the facilities world of like, I know we're going to need. A new plow for the plow truck, that kind of thing, for example, so, and those are real needs, and, so for example, they're thinking about buying a piece of equipment this year for the facilities team to be able to take in-house the plowing of this property, snow plowing of this property, and not have that done by a contractor. So that would bring our, the ROI on that would be less than 3 years, would bring that work in-house and the team feels so they can do that. So it's a way to manage their budget. It would be using it different than what they originally had intended for, but helps us in the future.
And you're saying that would improve by,
That would come up through so the facilities manager would look at his budget, make that suggestion, go through the business manager and then myself and then talk to Joe. Final.
and are all deviations like that? Do all of them require superintendent approval, or are there some rules like it's less than X dollar amount, so therefore?
I mean, he
approve it?
signs off on everything, so like he does essentially see everything. But, you know, if it's. Lawrence is gonna buy 10 more pieces of toilet paper, like, that's probably not gonna be a big enough of an anomaly for Joe to notice. But if it's, yeah, I can't think of it, but, it's not like they're. Joe, I spend more time in Joe's office than he probably cares that I would. So like, there's a lot of open communication about this thing. So particularly around the budget and this time of year, so. Yeah,
Just another practice that we're doing that I'm sure our principals are fantastic and I'm sure I'm annoying them, even though they're back there smiling and they're very gracious, but. It's always been my practice that anytime somebody leaves an organization, we don't just rubber stamp let's replace it. Right, I want to look, it's much better, in my opinion, to be able to reduce staff through attrition than to have to lay people off. So when somebody does leave. We analyze, do we need this position? Is there a better way to do it? That slows things down, it gums things up, it annoys folks, but I think that's a good way of managing it. I'm a guy that every car that I've ever owned has gone through $250,000. I am as as cheap as they come, quite frankly. So I'm very grateful for the insights that we're getting from folks. And I know I'm not gonna catch everything this year. I've been here 3 months, but I am pretty notoriously frugal.
Hold on, we have somebody on, Bridget online, can we?
Yep.
Recognize her.
Thank you. Thanks so much. My question, I guess, is for Dr. Clark and Jean Marie. Have you gotten the state level factors yet that will help model what a 3.4% budget increase will turn into in terms of a tax rate increase?
Yeah, not officially, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, go ahead.
we got the December 1st letter, Bridget.
No, but I was asking more about the specific factors for the district as opposed to just the general December 1st letter. The ones about our weighted pupil count and our CLA specifically for South Burlington.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen those and we have, I don't want to be quoted on the numbers, so tell me if I say this wrong. We believe that with the 3.4% increase to our budget, that the district's tax rate would go up less than 4%, I believe.
And is that public information that was revealed to you, is like, or is it official or?
It is not official. It is insight from people in the know, so I probably shouldn't even be saying it, but I feel good that the increase to the budget is not going to be the avalanche that people might expect.
I was just gonna say that one of the things that, first, let me say, I am not Tim Jarvis. It's not my job to be Tim Jarvis. I really respect him, but he has a completely different background than I do. It's my job to help us be really good stewards of the budget that we create, that you've asked us to create, and to communicate that to all of you. I think last year we didn't do a great job. We did a really good job pushing a lot of information out to the community and confused everyone and got a lot of feedback that it felt not transparent and convoluted, and that's sort of how we got to today. I can help us control our school budget, and so we're working really hard to stay to that 3.4% increase that you asked us to. So I'm spending all of my time working on what our internal budget is and what I can control, how that impacts the tax rate or the taxpayers get. Like, I haven't gotten that far because there are other factors that I don't have control over that, like, I'm sort of like, that's not my job. My job is to control the school budget. And so I know Tim spent a lot of time really working through that whole algorithm to try to predict that. And I'm not that girl and I can't control that. So.
Well, I would just be cautious though. So for example, CVU or CVSD, which is right next door, went right to that. Somebody in the district needs to be modeling that, because the 3.4% that we've given as guidance may be too much as an increase. 4% sounds low to me based on the estimates. And again, the December 1st letter is all estimates, and it's going to change over the course of December and, even into the legislative session. But if we don't have our eye on the ball of what the output is in terms of tax rate, given what the state factors are, then this is why the budget is usually an iterative process. It's really hard to say the budget is going to go up by exactly this amount, or it's going to be capped at this amount, or it's going to go up that amount before we have a sense. There's a little bit of iteration that has to happen. And so I'm just a little concerned if nobody is focused on that outcome and that potential tax rate increase.
I think that's it's a good time to mention the importance of advocating at the state level for more fairness and just a more rational process. This whole thing about how local communities have to vote on budgets, but then really they could say any budget they wanted, and then the state's gonna reallocate the money anyway. And so, I think in our case, we were responsible And we said, we're not growing this budget more than inflation. But other communities may say, well, let's take it up 7% because we'll just get that money from the state. And then, South Burlington taxpayers will pay for that. So it's very important that state legislators hear from us that the budgeting process needs to be rationalized.
I feel I'm supporting this process and say unequivocally that that is the appropriate focus. I think the
Agreed.
fact that there is a condition that is out of our control is not something for which any of us here in this room are responsible. And we should not be gaming that system. So to say that 3.4 might, leave some money on the table, I just don't agree with that. I don't think that promotes good budgeting. It does not promote the kinds of looks that we're talking about here that Srini brought up, that you and Dr. Clark has said,
Well, I'm saying the opposite, actually, that it may be too much. And if we don't know what the potential tax rate is, we don't know. So for example, CVSD came to me and said that potentially they could see a 16% tax increase in some of their communities if they were to go with a level services budget. And I don't think that means that they're going up 7%. I don't think they're being irresponsible with a level services budget. And so they're having to really do some hard thinking in order to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm not saying that we're potentially leaving money on the table. I'm just saying it is important. I know that we can't change what the state level factors are in South Burlington, that has to be done at the state level. But I think somebody needs to have their eye on that ball and have that be a part of the conversation.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Jen. Do you want to ask another question to Joe?
No, it was just, no, you had said 250,000 for your car.
Oh.
Like meant 200,000 miles, that's all.
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
To be clear.
To be clear.
Yeah, 250,000 miles, right. Driving for the die.
A question for Jean
Can
Marie,
you come up to just so we can hear you?
right her back. It sounds like we're talking about budget oversight, monitoring, audit, whatever you want to call it. Does the district have a program where you periodically look at the budgets, the principals, department heads look at it and develop some type of estimate to complete the school year?
They're working on their budgets all the time, for sure. They're in them constantly, and that's why the business manager and our speaker, not to manager, knows they're not what's passing.
That be funneled to you. It seems like we've got a surprise sometimes with surpluses. And that doesn't seem like it should be happening. I mean, somewhere there's money being held that is being factored into a budget for the future that is not going to be spent. It's like paying too much in income tax. You feel good when you got the money back, but you're really getting your money. Is there a process where you're looking and saying, overall in the district, we budgeted $70 million and we're coming in at 68, our best guess, we're not gonna go cutting stuff, we're not gonna give money back right now. That's where we're at.
Yes.
You have that process?
Right.
Is it ever made public?
Listen, this is my first round in this, my friend Brian, so, I don't know that is a public process. I know that that's what the business manager is doing, constantly looking at where we're at, casting, and I know that those individuals are looking at that, so, I don't know that that's a ton of process.
It's probably public information if it's asked for.
Yeah.
But then the question I think you're getting at is it proactively published? And, right?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say, to echo that comment, and Srini, thank you very much for your comments both in our prior meeting and tonight. Fundamentally, I agree, and a budget that takes the prior year's number and multiplies it by inflation is a bad budgeting process. And I would like to hear assurances that is not our budgeting process, and certainly there are some things we can comfortably inflate by inflation. To use your toilet paper example, I think that's very reasonable. There are some things that should have their own multiplier beyond inflation, like health insurance, which we all understand that. And then there are fixed costs and leases, which we can follow. But once we get past those items, everything outside of that category, I would love to hear is on the table for something. We may never get to zero-based budgeting, right? But some version of that, some version of auditing. I don't know if that encapsulates what what your thoughts are. But I think that's what I would love to hear, and fully appreciate that we are in the middle of a budgeting vortex right now. As you just said, it's the first rodeo, so I'm empathetic to that. But as we go through this process, I personally and the board and the community would love, and I think benefit from hearing about that last category, right? You know, we found $100,000 here, or this was a $200,000 one-time expense that we do not expect to repeat in this budget, right? But focusing on that last category, not simply multiplying by inflation and advertising when we have chosen to not do that and we've reviewed each line item, I think will go a long way in community trust and for me personally, feeling like we are being responsible stewards of our budget. And the net number may very well come out to be 3.4%, but it's the process that leads to that number that I think would help.
Yeah, as we work on building this budget with our building principals, it isn't a zero-based budgeting modeling, but it feels similar to that. But there are still things that are going to surprise us. People, especially that move in and out of the district, students that get placed outside of our district that we have to provide transportation for that we didn't know about in November of the year, and then, like some things are hard for us.
Arbitrations, legal matters, all of
Yeah.
those things that
Yeah.
you can't predict.
So it's never going to be perfect.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course, and I know we'll never get to zero-based budgeting,
Yeah.
that was just an example.
Yeah.
But I guess I would hope that the buffer for those things is reflected in a contingency line item, not in a times inflation.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet, right? Absolutely, let's put contingencies in there, but let's call them a contingency instead of maybe finding them because we inflated something that, for 5 years it didn't need.
Yeah.
And I'm not with you in the office, I know you were only part of the budget, so I'm not, maybe that's very well the process now, but the more we could advertise that, where we've chosen to make those decisions, I think would really help, me feel confident and community feel confident that, we're not just multiplying everything by inflation.
You have any other comments? Yes, the rest of Dr. Clark's comment about ideas and so on. I think it's great that you're looking at efficiencies. Terrific. That's a good place to start, I guess, in my opinion. I do believe that we need to do some strategic things differently to get out of that cycle of human resources. We really need them. And the option is much higher taxes or higher taxes, or we have to cut people and that's cutting resources. That's not what we need. And we hear that this is a employee of people, salaries, benefits driven organization. I get it. So what can we do about the expense side on wages and benefits? I know if we were to look at a trade union or a construction company, you're gonna have a gradual, here's our senior group of people and they're paid this. We always have certain people at the pipeline entry level that are going to ascend to those positions. And I think in South Burlington, what I've heard is we want the best. We'll go out and hire somebody from outside the district who is gonna, let's say, get plugged into year 10 of the staff. Now they're what, 8 years from the max? They're gonna work 20 more years. We've got them at the max. I'm not saying they're bad teachers, I'm not saying, but for a system like we have, you have to have equal distribution at every level. And I don't know what the percentage of our folks are at the highest level. But if you ran a bunch of numbers, you could figure out that down the road, this is what it's gonna cost us, because you just took regular wage increase, medical, I believe in tri-10, wage increases and so on. You could probably predict what your salaries are gonna be for those people for the next 15 years. So I think we need to strategically look at, we're gonna get a hold of wages, hiring entry level people out of college, 2 years experience, instead of these 10-year people with so many hours who plug in at $40,000 more into the schedule. That's $40,000 more calculated into retirement or comp benefit. It snowballs. And once they're at the max, there's no movement in education very much. It's not Vermont, but you're there. We really need to do something about the wage side, if I'm saying. And I think it's by hiring good, sharp, young people that the schools are turning out. because they're turning out good people, you know. Thank you.
Any other thoughts from the board about budget?
I would say the last thing that I would say is as much transparency as we can provide to the public, the better off we're going to be. So I'm highlighting if there's efficiencies that are being found, you know, presenting the budget when it's available and providing that information, because I do think that we've got some incredible resources in our community. And, you know, we've got cold eyes that are looking at things and, you know, I mean, it's just great to hear the feedback from everyone. So I think that, again, as much as we can put out there and solicit that feedback and be welcome to it, I think better off.
Yeah, and we will absolutely do that. It's what's frankly frustrating for me in this position is we make decisions, but there's a time frame for going through those decisions. There's a, you know, a list of who do I have to tell, right? And what order do I tell them? And how do we break this news and all of those kinds of things? But I think it is fair to say that before that January 14th meeting, when you vote on the budget, you'll have a line by line list of where we made all these reductions.
Yeah. So we have two people online. Can we start with Forrest? Forrest, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm a South Burlington Elementary School parent. I see Principal McDonald back in the wall there. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for being there tonight. First, I want to just call out the point about communication. I think that you are actually communicating. What's disappointing to me is that I don't see many other South Burlington parents in that room. I can't see who's online. I am blind to that. So perhaps they're all online, and I hope that's the case. So I just want to say thank you for creating the forum, even if you're not getting the engagement that you want. Also, it's kind of hard at 6:30 at night with two kids to make this happen, but I'm doing it. I also I understand that the superintendent works for the city and he works for the school board, and I know that there's been a tremendous amount of like adversarial interaction between the school board and the superintendent in the past. There's not so much of that tonight, but I would invite both parties to just operate from a place of best intentions. Like Dr. Clark is very new to the district. He's mentioned that he is playing catch up while drinking from the fire hose. That sounds like Jean Marie. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with you, but you're also kind of new to this gambit. And so giving people a little bit of grace to make that catch up, to assume that they are looking at things with the eyes that you're asking them to look at, instead of coming from a position of just thinking that they don't know what they're doing, could be really helpful in terms of making sure that this all goes successfully. Not only that, it demonstrates to our kids who probably aren't really paying attention to what's going on that the adults in the room are being adults. And I think that's probably a big takeaway to what the superintendent mentioned at the beginning, like what is our end, right? In raising these kids through the public school system. And one of them is how to be productive people in society. And I think we're really responsible at all junctures to try and identify opportunities for them to do that. We have to model it. So just meeting one another with the best of intentions at the outset is a really, I think, positive way to try and do that. The other thing I want to mention is we're talking about like finding $200,000 here and there. Like that is quarters in the couch cushions. It's 0.2% of the overall budget, which was, what was it, 74 million? Like, it's not to say we shouldn't be looking for those things, but it sounds like there's a lot of time being spent trying to identify those small amounts. And I wonder if that's time better spent for Principal McDonald, focusing on what's happening in the school building. I trust and believe that Lissa has great control over what's happening at Rick Marquardt every day where my kids are, but I'm going to bet, I haven't talked to her about this, but I'm going to bet that she would rather not be nickel and diming her team constantly. It's a distraction. I realize that this is a much larger thing, so we can't all control that, but just making sure we're kind of lifting our heads up and thinking about where are the really impactful ways. Again, the superintendent talked about 2 million. That's a little more impactful than a couple 100,000. And then the last thing I wanted to ask Jean Marie about is you mentioned that we had transitioned to a new finance and accounting system. And I wanted to ask about that sort of contingency that you reference, like, is it legal matters? Is it transportation needs? Are we taking like data analytics to any of that to look at kind of what trends might be in terms of spending over the years for that sort of question mark box to be able to predict a little bit better going forward? I don't know if that's really even feasible, but I just wondered if that would be, if it's possible to look at what spending trends are to understand how to think about what you might need to set aside as contingency and going forward.
Ingrid, before you go, if I might, or I just wanted to respond to one of the first things that you said. I'm also a parent of kids in school, and I think that before I really started paying attention to the school board and getting on the school board, I had a very parent-focused, school-focused perspective on it. I was basically like, it felt like something that was primarily about the kids in the schools. And I think what I have learned is that really our job on the school board is to represent the entire community, all the taxpayers, all the voters. And ultimately, if we're in sync, if we're, because like for somebody on a fixed income, for somebody retired, they might not think that $200,000 is, coins in the couch. And so like, if we can be in sync with the community in terms of the investments that we want to make in schools, and this community has put a huge amount of money into schools. We're a very well-financed district. Then in the long term, that's the way that we can have a sustainable relationship with everybody in the non-school community. So I just wanted to point out that it's very important for us on the school board, in my opinion, to really look at the non-school community and their interests and keep those in mind. But sorry, go ahead. Right, go ahead. Yes.
I guess I just wanted to, you caught my comment about the new fiscal management software. And so because of the new software, we are able to look back as accurately as we can look forward. And our budgets are getting cleaner and more specific as we go along. Full transparency, the business office was really struggling with some staffing over the last year or so, and I'm really pleased to say that we're fully staffed out with some really incredible staff members who are just doing some really, really good work. And I have a lot more faith in our numbers going forward than I would have in our numbers going back. So, to your point around forecasting, that we were able to forecast our non-personnel budgets by looking at our past completed budget. Trends around contingencies, I guess I can't really speak to that right now. I feel like there was more to your question that I'm not answering.
Any other board comments on? We can, thank you for it. If we could go to Jerry.
So I have a couple of things to say. First of all, somewhat humorous, I guess. I rarely agree with Bridget Burkhart, but I will tonight. I think you must keep your eye on the ball with regard to what the education tax rate increase is likely to be. And the reason for that is, as Phil Scott said, over the last 5 years, but education taxes have increased more than 40%. That is dramatically above inflation. And since education taxes are directly proportional to education tax assessments, if over 5 years the education tax rate has increased 40%, so has the education tax assessments on property tax bills. Most importantly, a few things, and I want people to understand this. I said it many times, but I'll say it again. As a percent of income, Vermont has the highest property taxes of all 50 states. As a percent of income, Vermont has the highest property taxes of all 50 states. 75% of the property tax goes to education, and education property taxes are only one of 3 ways that residents pay for education in the state of Vermont. 100% of the sales tax, which is about the same amount of money as is raised from primary homesteads in Vermont. That's about $625 million. 100% of that goes to the education fund. And because the teachers' pension fund, VSTRS, has been significantly underfunded for many years, this year and continuing, according to the former treasurer, state treasurer, contributions from the general fund, whose primary revenue stream is resident income taxes, will be needed to be transferred to the STRS, the pension fund, until 2038. This year, $230 million will have to leave the general fund and go to the pension fund. And again, the number one revenue stream in the general fund is income taxes. So not only do we pay for public school education in the state of Vermont via our property taxes on our property tax bill, we also pay for it through our sales taxes and we make any purchases, and also through our income taxes. And I might mention, speaking for my own property tax bill, with the so-called buy down that the legislature and the governor agreed to for this year, I saved $16 on a expected $440 increase on my education property taxes. I saved $16 with the buy down. But to get that $16, the state used $63 of my income taxes to buy down property taxes statewide. So only in Vermont could I get a $16 credit by paying $63 in income taxes. And I'll challenge anybody to disprove me wrong on it. The other points I want to mention is that, as Phil Scott has said, over the last 20 years, while education taxes have been increasing significantly, enrollment in Vermont public schools has declined by 20%. And believe it or not, I checked my records from handouts from former Superintendent David Young. In South Burlington, if you just look at South Burlington students, K through 12, the numbers have gone down by 18%. But I can assure you the number of enrolled employees has not gone down. Statewide in Vermont, the pupil to employee ratio, the last number I got is 4.4 to 1. That's from the state AOE. Somebody in an article today said it's been lowered to 3.4 to 1. But what you want to understand is the national rate is 7.45 to 1. So we have a dramatically higher number of employees for every pupil in the state compared to the other 49 states in this country. And that's even true for South Burlington. The ratio in South Burlington of pupils to FTE is just a little bit under 5 to 1, about 50% lower than the national average. So when you say for this budget, you're going to try to basically not do any cuts for your 5 public schools and make all of your cuts to central office, what you're saying to me is you've allowed the massive inflation into the budget, which has been going on for 2 decades now, to remain as it is. You're doing nothing to address the fact that we've been increasing the budgets over the years beyond what is sustainable. And by simply maintaining the status quo, you're basically incorporating instability into the budgets going forward. You think by doing this, you're going to make everybody happy, but in the long run, you're putting off until tomorrow what you need to do today. You're still kicking the can down the road because you're not in any way moving closer to sustainability. And we're going to be back here, if you adopt this budget, we'll be back here next year and the year after until it becomes so catastrophic that there will no longer be an option to control spending. We will have to do it because we continue to make excuses for doing it in every year in the past. I'm warning you, if you don't do it now, you're going to have to do it in the future. It's just not sustainable. Thank you.
Does any board member have any? I had just a quick, Jerry said that we hadn't done anything, and this is the lowest budget increase in 5 years. And so it's in my opinion, it's about what direction we're going in. But I do respect and hear many of the points that you made.
I do too. And I would say I've been here 3 months, and frankly, it will take some time to determine what other reductions need to be made. So.
I would just also like to say, I really appreciate you trying to keep the resources in the school. That's important to me. And I think it's what our kids need. So I really appreciate that you're doing that. And I don't think they need less resources. I think we had to work on some issues that we have with what we have before we can think about reducing resources for our students. I think that would make any sense whatsoever.
Am I still live?
Yes,
Yep.
sure.
I forgot to mention one thing. Now, I still disagree with your 3.4% for Northeast inflation. I have a 3.1% from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I think we have a disagreement there. But I also want to mention, I want to remind you, 18% of residents are senior citizens, and our COLA for Social Security next year is 2.8%. And our Part B premium for Medicare is going up 10%. So really what you've said is you've relegated senior citizens in the community to an economic status lower than the compensation you're providing to employees in the school district. And speaking on behalf of the senior citizens, I take exception to that marginalization of our economic well-being.
Very important point. Very important point.
Thank you for your comments. I did just want to say, I appreciate the efficiencies that Dr. Clark and Jean Marie have already worked to find, and we are only a couple months into this process and Joe's tenure, and I appreciate the efficiencies that you found and that we started in central office. So thank you for that, and look forward to the additional efficiencies that we may find where we may. So thank you for starting where you did and finding the efficiencies.
Maybe we'll take one more comment on this one or two. Elizabeth, go ahead.
I'm Elizabeth Fitzgerald. I didn't really prepare any comments, but just wanted to make a couple of these segue Seamus into another item that you're planning to talk about. Couple of things. One, I would encourage the board as part of your policy governance review to look at least at monthly, if not quarterly financials that look at actuals and forecasts, because I think that can give you folks and policy, the largest policy governance issue that the board is responsible for is the budget development. So looking at those actual forecasts and then where there may be encumbrances that the business office can anticipate can give you an idea of what's coming down the road versus kind of getting to the end of the year and just in the budget process. I think dollarizing some of the big ticket items like wages and healthcare expenses is important for the community to understand. And my understanding in the past is that's about 80% of the budget. And I think somebody else brought up sort of a real solid understanding of the FTEs that are being considered within the district and within the proposed budget to really understand where that may start to get out of whack with enrollment. I think the comments about one-time spending, again, if there are one-time expenses that can be anticipated, identify those up front in the budget. The understanding that you'll always need some surplus for unexpected expenses. A couple of things, that I think about when I think about the school system, it's really similar to the medical field. Is sort of first do no harm, and that's kind of the trust that you hold with students and with the schools and staff as well. The tough part about the budget process is you can come up with ideas that might drive efficiencies or improvements down the road, but the budget process is not the time to implement those. So some of the things I've talked about in the past myself would be looking at back office operations, and given that the consolidation of districts has kind of been put on the back burner for now, I think South Burlington can be a leader in really looking at consolidating back office operations and driving maybe some of the efficiencies, Dr. Clark, that you've already identified across all of Chittenden County, for instance. I think looking at AP classes, where rather than cutting something, if it's low enrollment, the opportunity to leverage remote learning, for instance, and now, you require some contractual changes, but considering that, and we've done it in South Burlington with co-curricular activities, and partnering with other school districts, but maybe that's an area that opens up opportunities, but leverage the expense of that across districts. And the last point I wanted to make is I think there's a credibility issue that if it doesn't exist right now, I think it's evident and emerging with the community, which is really the credibility issue around what outcomes are. And I think that's gonna segue into another topic you've got here. But people want to know what is the value for what they're paying us to spend. And when you look at some of the competencies here, academic proficiency is one of the ones that falls short by a lot of measures. And I know there's a lot of catch up going on, but I think you were considering that, and I know you were looking at that as well. But really looking at understanding the credibility gap and the value proposition of what is being asked from a taxpayer and closing that gap. Thanks.
Well, that does bring to mind, Joe, one thing that we talked about. I know when you talked to the redistricting committee, I think you mentioned that South Burlington is interested in BOCES, like the Board of Cooperative Education Services. So I would love to hear more about how we might be able to cooperate with other districts in Chittenden County, even in advance of redistricting, to provide better services for less money.
All right.
And then let's take one more, and if you don't mind, we move to the next.
Yeah, I just wanted one concern that I had last year during the budget process that was interested for, oh yeah, Krista Shen. Parent in South Burlington. Just related to programming, I don't know if there's any way we can work a little savvy with our money and maybe look to the building principals. And I know that they're being given some leeway with some, I don't know how that's gonna look. But I believe we made some cuts to our pre-K programming. And you know, those are our most vulnerable students. And giving the most robust programming, you know this, right? I'm talking to an educator. So, you know, I think making cuts to that programming might have been, you know, not, in my eyes, not the most ideal decision. You know, and so if there's a way that we can move things around and maybe make just small gains back to our pre-K classrooms, you know, taking away from that then gives us students in elementary and middle school that end up with lots of needs, right? And so, you know, I think putting back in there will then give us less needs. So, you know, if there's any way we can get back to that program. Ideal.
Thank you.
Yeah. And is schools out separate from?
No,
No.
schools out is part of the district.
It's not. It's not from
Not yet.
And if I were to speak to the middle school, I asked my children what they would like to keep and what they like, so can I share that? No,
Yeah.
they would love, so, they love field trips, so keep that if we can. And they love, so band tutors are wonderful, so if you can keep our band tutors, that'd be great. And from my perspective, the math lab has been wonderfully helpful for my kids, so if there's any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe let's take one more conference.
One more comment. Yeah. I just want to kind of reinforce the message that nothing lasted. Yes, us are the same. I think maybe you should. Everyone in the community should think of this phase as a phase of rewriting the story of somebody. The whole issue around credibility and transparency, I think, is an important point. I think some of the things that I pointed out, if you do the due diligence and do a storytelling on how you've streamlined, I wouldn't use the word cleanup, how you have streamlined the district operations, I think it will go a long way. I mean, I think we'll get incredible support from the community. On how, and then all this issue around academic proficiency and all that, I mean, those are all much bigger challenges. I believe that any organization, if they want to get better, they have to consistently improve. I think these things that have come up will put you on a path of continuous improvement. And I haven't heard the word continuous improvement much in this business before. So maybe with the environment you're in and all this redistricting agenda and all that, I think South Burlington can set itself apart and rewrite the story. So I appreciate board members who are open to new way of thinking, and I hope that this gets some traction. A lot of smart people in the community can help. You don't have to do all the work. A lot of people can help. So I hope this could be the beginning of a new phase for South Burlington. Thank you.
That's a great place to. And that.
Yeah, I just want to say
Yeah,
one last thing to that point, is I completely agree. And I think there's a great opportunity here. I think and one of the things that we've talked about is creating a scorecard that allows us to see where our opportunities are. Like, and we've got a retreat coming up in a couple of weeks, and hopefully maybe that'll be something, I don't know if it's on the agenda or not. But it's something that we've been thinking of, like, how can we transparently show to the community, maybe some specific metrics, KPIs that we're looking at, to say, this is what we're looking at. And what are the results? And where do we have that opportunity for continuous improvement? And where are we driving the efficiencies? Not just in what the board is doing in our operations with policy governance and monitoring and all of that, but also with community engagements and looking at some of the information with, the budget and how we're stewarding that and communicating that out and educating the community on what all of this means. So, I mean, you're speaking exactly what I feel like a lot of us have been talking about, and it's just bringing that into, crystallizing it and then delivering it.
Glad to hear that. Very glad to hear.
Yeah.
Well, great, thank you for the. We could go higher.
Just one final comment. I just want to say how grateful I am for all of the community members who have come out tonight in person and online and at our last community forum. It's really easy to not pay attention to this and to not be invested. And so I know we have some familiar faces that join us on a regular basis, and even though sometimes you're asking us questions that are uncomfortable for us to answer, or we don't have the answers immediately at our fingertips. I'm just really grateful that you're here and participating and asking those questions, because we are trying really hard. And I think that having you as our partners is really valuable. So thank you for doing that work, showing up for your community.
The next item on our agenda for the community forum is the permanent superintendent search. So the board committed to do a full national search to fill the permanent superintendent position. So in this discussion, if anybody has any thoughts about what is important for the CEO of what is the most valuable asset that's held by South Burlington, I think we'd love to hear it. I would just ask that as we discuss this permanent superintendent position, we on the board do not talk about any candidates or potential candidates or anybody in particular. So so does anybody have any thoughts about the CEO search as it courses? Go ahead, Bill, please.
I just had a question. Well, I know that the sort of like whatever the redistricting effort that's going on at the state level isn't settled yet, but do you know if that will have any impact on this role, which is to say, like, would you hire someone and then the role goes away because the district gets absorbed or combined or something like that? Or is that not a concern?
Yeah, certainly people who apply for this role, that is a risk that they're taking. And
Yeah.
the advice that we got from our search consultant was to, not necessarily put that front and center in our job posting, but people, you know, anybody in the superintendent role is expected to be able to do a level of due diligence that would uncover something like that, you know, should know enough about the Vermont landscape.
And the contracts aren't written indefinitely to begin with, right? So it's normal to expect a 2 or 3 or some year contract, and that redistricting, which I don't want to comment on, but even if it were to go forward, wasn't for another 2 years, but that would take. So there's still space to write normal one. So permanent is never permanent. I guess.
Well, so I guess my follow-up question then would be, I'm assuming that mounting a search is costly, and we just spent a lot of time talking about expenses in the school budget. So has there been a discussion around extending an opportunity to Dr. Clark to just stay on until that redistricting happens and we have a better understanding of how that might shake out for that role?
She's got a great point.
Yeah, we're not, thank you for your question, but we are not gonna talk about any individual people.
Fair enough. You made that clear, sorry.
Reports have made about the cost of the superintendent search, and I will share, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how affordable the process was, and I forget the exact number, but maybe if anybody recalls, it was $12,000. So so of course, I don't know if you heard that, so $12,000 for the permanent superintendent search. Which at least in my ears felt very reasonable given the.
That's remarkably reasonable, yes, because I know what it costs to hire an executive, so it's, yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you.
And I would say that I think that the board has to do this, knowing that the drama that has rolled out the last year. I think the board absolutely is doing the right thing by doing a national search.
Our due diligence. And one other thing too, I'd like to add is that we had interviewed different groups to do the search. And we had also interviewed a boutique consulting company to do it. And I want to say it was about 4 times, maybe 5 times as high. So I mean, 5 times as high. So we're leveraging the Vermont School Board Association. I feel like we've got a very good partnership going with that we haven't had in the past, which is pretty fantastic. And so I agree though. Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be done.
I would like also to point out, you know, as we talk about cost savings on a superintendent search, I want to go back to the board's commitment to do a national, a very serious search. The impact of the CEO is humongous. And so it's a very, and that's why we've had this discussion item at multiple board meetings. This is why we have it on the agenda tonight. This is why we put an ad in the paper last week with a link to a form that you can fill out. The board recognizes that the role of the superintendent is incredibly impactful on every aspect: costs, budgets, student performance, teacher, all that stuff. So everybody who can, if you have a friend who has opinions about this, please have them get in contact with us.
And also, I know the QR code is coming out in the other paper. And I think we said it was open until December 1st. Or
It came out last week's
paper, but I haven't got it here.
Oh.
So like, it's like a week. I'm like,
Delayed.
Yeah.
It's still open.
It's still open. So I think that's an important thing. And then also, we would invite everybody, because we've got our community forum tonight. We're gonna have another one on December 15th. And I think we've alerted folks to that, but we are going to be interviewing the candidates for the permanent role on December the 12th, which is a week from this Friday. So it's next Friday. And then we will be down to 2 candidates that will advance to the final round. And we're inviting the community to come and meet them. And so that will happen on Monday, December the 15th. I forget what time, 6 o'clock. I think it's 6 o'clock PM. So yeah, 6 PM. So you know, it's great to come and ask questions and just be present. You know, Forrest, that was one of the things you had mentioned that, you know, you're not sure who is here. I mean, I would love to see more people showing up at the forums. And, you know, Dr. Clark had hosted a town hall a couple of weeks ago, and it was really good, but I think that there were, yeah, 20 something that were there, but a lot of them, I know, I went into a breakout room. Was that the one with the breakout rooms? And I was in a breakout room with Pat Burke and yeah, Suzanne. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Got 20 of them, half are probably school employees.
Half of them were school employees. So it's like, we need to get more engagement from our community. Like, bring a friend to these things, you know? Emily will make cookies. No, really, I mean, it's true, because this is all about stakeholder engagement, and it's so critical that people have a seat at the table, and let us hear your voices, it matters.
Any other,
Yeah.
no, that's great. Any other board comment on the superintendent search? Any other public comment on superintendent search? Please.
You wanna know what we want? Is that what you're looking for? Okay. You know, I would say, you know, it would be really important to me, it's for someone who is a strong communicator, you know, both oral communication and written communication, and someone who is an active listener, you know, can sit and listen and take input from both community members, from the board, from teachers, and then implement that feedback and information, but then also make decisions, you know, and be decisive in their decisions. And, you know, also somebody who is organized. In general, it's organized, you know, doesn't come showing up discombobulated, you know, and someone who has, you know, a good understanding of finance. You know, that's a, you know, part of their jobs to help, you know, understand education, the budgeting and all the parts of that. And an approachable person, you know, is somebody who, you know, these people feel like they can go to, right? And speak to and that they feel supported by, not somebody who's sitting in an office all day and with their door closed and is not available for help and support. That's what you want.
All right, if we don't have any more comments on that, we'll move to the last item for our community forum, which is the NESDEC best use study proposal, which is you know, I would love to hear what that is, you know, explain like I'm five. So maybe we can start with Joe explaining what we're talking about, what the benefits are, what implications it might have.
So as we talk about, you know, potential efficiencies and how might we operate the district better. I would recommend that we use a unbiased source like NESDEC to come in and do this best use study proposal. And I remember at the last meeting, we were asked about, wasn't there some sort of proposal like this done before? I did find that, and it wasn't quite the same thing. What the best use study proposal would do, we specifically are asking them to look at our 3 elementary schools, South Point, the middle school, and central office, I guess everything except the high school, to determine, is there a better way for us to organize? Are we using the facilities to the best of our ability? Can we downsize? Can we consolidate? Those sorts of things. Frankly, because when you talk about consolidation, that becomes a really hot potato kind of issue, which is why I think it's better to have an outside source come in. So it's not perceived as some sort of internal decision that's being made. So this proposal, as I provided to you, does cost about $16,000. That is a discount because we are members of NESDEC. It would take them about 3 or 4 months to do it. Nothing that they would do would be able to be implemented for the 26-27 school year. Well, I guess I'm assuming that. What I'm expecting them to do is come back with bigger picture kind of items. So this is a year out kind of thing. I also don't see this as a long-term solution. My 3 months here have shown me that we probably need to talk about new facilities at some point. but that's probably a little further down the way. What can we do now to save some money? Can we operate more efficiently? So NESDEC would come in, they look at our enrollment projections, they look at our facilities, how they're laid out, they measure things, they see class sizes, all of those kinds of things, and then they provide us a report with recommendations about what would they do if they were operating this district.
I saw your this proposal and I'm interested in it, and I'm glad you mentioned consolidation, because what I disappointed to see would be consolidate your 3 elementary schools. That is an idea. It is a hot topic. It has been suggested before. It will cost a lot of money to build a new, so I like the hearing you say, I want to find some other fixes. I don't want to hear just consolidate your elementary school, because that's not going to happen to save us money quickly and to make us more efficient. So.
And I'm glad you said that, because their recommendations will not be new construction,
Okay.
right? It's going to be, what do you currently have and how can you operate those better? Which is why it's a more short-term approach, but I think it could be significant savings, frankly.
I really appreciate it. I've lived through the idea of consolidating these elementary schools, and it's a conversation that needs to be.
That's a community decision.
Yeah.
I think, what I would say about consolidate, like normally the operation of schools, especially in a policy governance framework, is entirely the purview of the superintendent. But when it comes to things like consolidation, I think we should be open to any suggestion. I think that on the school board, we represent more than just the parents and the students. We represent the taxpayers. And so I think that any decision regarding consolidation moves out of an operational consideration and more into the political, where we just have to build consent or that there isn't consent for it. So I think that from your perspective, in my opinion, NESDEC's perspective, you should propose whatever the best thing is for the district, but what the decision is not superintendent's of, do we do some, controversial thing that better rests with the school board. Because if we make the wrong decision or if we're trending in the wrong direction, we can be replaced. And that's a sure thing.
And I agree with that, and that's my history. I'm new to the policy governance thing, but I agree with that. I think the larger the decision, the more people that should be involved in that decision. Tomorrow, we might have a snow day, that's on me. When we're talking about building new facilities or consolidating or doing something short term, that should be an entire community. The community owns the schools and they should have decision-making authority for those kinds of decisions.
That's the way it was last. And if you're talking about consolidating the elementary schools, you would have to build a new one, and the public would have to approve that.
Well, but I think that to clarify, what I'm saying is, like, let's say that, and I'm speculating here, that I'm not on this board because I'm an educational expert, but if NESDEC came and said, oh, well, you should put all the 4th and 5th graders at one school and all the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders at another school, right? That is a form of consolidation. And I think and again, that may have many financial benefits. There's going to be parents who are unhappy with that, but then there could also be many voters and taxpayers who would be happy with that. And so it's just that's what I mean, that it's, even decisions like that really roll to the school board.
Agreed. Yeah, and again, when we talk about consolidation with this report specifically, we're not talking about new construction. What can we do with our current facilities if we're not using them to the best of our ability?
I just have a quick question. Is that just facility-based recommendations or is it personnel as well? Like, say.
No, it's not personnel. This is specifically for how do we use our facilities?
How you.
Yes.
So one thing I would add, Joe, is after we talked about this before, I had asked if you would provide an example. And you provided that example to the board, which was really great to see. I'm wondering if it would be possible, or if there's a value add, like if others in the community would be interested to see, or if that's something that can be posted. I don't know if it can be or not.
Anything could be posted. Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't
The
know.
board wants me to post it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if there's any interest to see what like a report out would look like, Joe had shared, I think it was the 3 school districts.
Preschool, and I don't think they were all best use studies. There's some were, enrollment projections, which NESDAQ does for us for free because we are one of their, members. And one was a joint, enrollment projection and best use study. But
I
yeah,
mean, it's just kind of neat to see, like, this would be an output that you might anticipate. You know, coming out of the study if we were to do it.
and I'm not asking for action tonight.
Right.
I was hoping we could have action at the December meeting, but honestly, they wouldn't get started probably until the spring anyway. So if it rolled over to January, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
But I love seeing all the data that was there, that they provided. I thought it was really
Yeah,
helpful.
I think it is too.
And I think it's in the spirit of squeezing as much juice out of the investment that the community has already made.
Yeah.
So very much support that.
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
If you do go forward with it, which I think I support is it, I think always finding efficiencies and things, and however that moves forward. I think being, again, transparent and the communication piece would be so important, and put it in your wolves thing and having it in newsletters, and because if it becomes a surprise and parents are like, whoa.
It'll absolutely be
Right,
out
like,
there.
yeah.
It'll be presented at a board meeting. It'll be all over because
Not
this
gonna
is,
be
yeah,
well received, and it's gonna be a hard, right, it's gonna be hard news for people.
could be, or maybe it's,
Change
maybe.
is always hard, right?
Yeah.
Change is difficult, and so I think preemptively telling people, this is what we're doing, this could be what it looks like, right, a sample report.
Yeah.
And this is why we're doing it, and the rationale, and what it could, this is what the pros of it, right? It's all about selling it, like how you present the, all of it,
Well,
so.
it would be irresponsible to spend that kind of money to get a report out.
Absolutely.
Right, and it's, it's how you market it, how you sell it, give, present that information.
And if I may, that they're recommendations, they're not telling us.
No, right.
Right.
It's in there.
It's a report on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a fresh perspective.
It's data.
It's data.
Yep.
Data that you need. Should.
Right.
So I would suggest that if that's something that you can put up, like, even if we have, I don't know, this is something we can consider in our scorecard and how we're communicating out, but if there's like some key takeaways that we want the community to know about, maybe it's something that gets thrown up on our website. Like, hey, as we discussed, here are some of the things that we had chatted about, and here's links for folks, just an
Yeah, I
idea.
would be more than happy to put a story on our website and email it to all community members as I do with all this other stuff. And again, the key point I would want to get across is just this, it's data, it's a recommendation. Nobody should panic or do any of that yet, right? It's just a study that's being done to help us make some decisions, and they'll hear more about it.
And here's what they did in Massachusetts.
Yeah, right, Massachusetts.
Is there any other board comment? Any other community comment? Okay, online. Well, great. Thank everybody for coming. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Two things before you do,
Sure.
so yeah, I would just say.
Yes, yes. Yes.
And then we have another meeting on December 17th where the permanent superintendent will be announced to the public. And so that is our board meeting 2 weeks from today. So that's all I want to say. Sorry.
So I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Laura, motion. Jennifer, second. Any discussion?
Just 2 points.
All in favor? Okay.